There is something deeply unsettling about this truth. Sometimes the very way we think, the way we feel, the way we react, is quietly hurting the people around us, and we don't even know we're doing it. Welcome back. Mystics, light workers, earth angels, the sacred clowns, the intuitive dominants, the empathetic souls who've been chosen and placed on the earth to help the collective part of humanity heal and sustain. Tonight, we're not talking about toxic people. We aren't talking about narcissists. We're not talking about how the world failed you. We're talking about something much more uncomfortable. We're talking about you and me, and the human tendency to justify our own chaos. Why is it so hard to see ourselves clearly? Why do we convince ourselves that our reactions were reasonable, even when they leave damage behind? Why does depression sometimes grow worse over time? Not because life is attacking us, but because we are repeating patterns we refuse to examine. And why is it so much easier to analyze other people's flaws, vulnerabilities, and shadows than to confront our own? Tonight we are going to explore these psychological defense mechanisms: projection and rationalization, cognitive distortions, trauma reenactment, the shadow self, and the spiritual principle of self-accountability. This isn't about shame. This is about awareness, because what we refuse to see within ourselves eventually shapes our suffering. This is why we struggle with seeing ourselves clearly. The human mind isn't designed for truth. It's designed for protection. Sigmund Freud introduced the idea of defense mechanisms, unconscious psychological strategies we use to protect ourselves from anxiety, shame, emotional pain, projection, denial, rationalization, and displacement. These mechanisms operate automatically, silently, like shadows behind your perception. A word of criticism hits, and suddenly, anger flares, not because it truly belongs to the moment, but because layers of past fear and shame have been triggered. If you hurt someone with harsh words, your mind may whisper, "They pushed me first. They deserved it. I was just being honest." This is rationalization, and it feels real. But feeling justified does not mean being correct. Here's a great example of everyday projection. Imagine this. You just got home from a stressful day at work. Your partner asks a simple question about dinner, and you snap. Later you tell yourself, "They always push me to the edge. I had no choice." You feel justified, but what actually happened? Your stress triggered a reaction that hurt someone you love, and instead of noticing your role, your mind rewrites the story to protect your ego. That is projection at work, your inner tension reflected outward without awareness. At work, someone gives you constructive feedback. You roll your eyes or respond sarcastically. You justify it by telling yourself, "They just don't understand the effort I put in. They're just being inconsiderate." Meanwhile, your unconscious mind knows the truth. You're defensive because you secretly fear failure. This is the shadow at play, disowned parts of yourself influencing your behavior. Now we enter the shadow we avoid. Carl Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we refuse to identify with. Traits we deny, impulses we suppress, flaws we pretend we don't have. The more we reject these parts, the more powerfully they operate unconsciously. If you believe you are always the victim, You will unconsciously ignore moments where you were controlling. If you believe you are always kind, you may overlook passive aggression. If you believe you are spiritually awakened, you may miss arrogance disguised as insight. The shadow thrives in blind spots. And here is the deeper issue. The ego's primary job is to maintain a consistent self-image. It would rather distort reality than allow you to see yourself as flawed. Here's how the shadow appears in our daily life. You have a friend who constantly points out others' mistakes. You pride yourself on being helpful and observant. But when they question your behavior, you feel defensive, even angry. That hidden defensiveness is part of your shadow, a reflection of insecurity you refuse to acknowledge and accept. This leads us to reveal why depression can worsen when we avoid self-reflection. When we continuously justify harmful patterns, we create internal fragmentation. Internal fragmentation simply means that different parts of you are in conflict. One part believes you are a good, reasonable person. Another part knows, even if quietly, that your behavior sometimes causes harm. When those two realities don't align, the mind tries to protect your self-image by justifying the actions instead of integrating the truth. Over time, that inner split creates tension, and chronic internal tension often turns into emotional exhaustion, shame, and eventually depression. I'll give an example of this fragmentation in action. Think of someone who constantly criticizes others for being lazy, yet secretly procrastinates on important tasks. Part of them believes they are responsible and disciplined. Another part knows they're avoiding discomfort. These conflicting parts create tension they may call stress or guilt. But the real issue is the internal fragmentation, the parts of themselves that aren't integrated. This split increases anxiety and sadness, even if they can't pinpoint why. You may consciously believe, I'm a good person. But unconsciously, your nervous system registers, I keep causing conflict. I keep pushing people away, then my relationships collapse. That dissonance builds tension. Leon Festinger called this cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that arises when behavior contradicts belief. If you never reconcile it, that tension turns into irritability, shame, anxiety, isolation, and depression. You begin to feel misunderstood. But what you may actually be feeling is internal misalignment, and unresolved misalignment becomes suffering. Here I have put together some spiritual insight on why accountability equates to our liberation. Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment to identity, to being right, to avoiding discomfort. Jesus said, first remove the plank from your own eye. Both teachings point toward the same psychological truth. Self-examination is freedom, not self-condemnation, not self-hatred, self-honesty. The ego resists this because admitting fault feels like death. But it's not death, it's integration. Now I'm going to explain why it's difficult admitting that we are wrong. Admitting fault threatens three things: identity, safety, and belonging. If as a child you were punished harshly for mistakes, your nervous system learned. Mistakes equals danger. So as an adult, accountability triggers fear. Your body reacts before logic. You defend, you deflect, and you justify. Not because you are evil, because you're protecting yourself from old pain. But protection can become destruction if left unconscious. Let's walk through an example of the difficulties we've all experienced at some point with admitting fault. A person snaps at a friend during a heated conversation. Later, instead of apologizing, they replay the story internally, emphasizing the friend's mistakes to justify their reaction. Even though they know they hurt the friend, the mind rewrites the memory to protect self-image, perpetuating conflict and internal tension. It is crucial to recognize your own patterns. Here are signs you may be justifying harmful behavior. You frequently explain why your reactions were necessary. You replay arguments, focusing only on what the other person did. You feel misunderstood in most relationships. You rarely ask, "What did I contribute to this?" Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly sat in the discomfort of realizing you hurt someone without immediately explaining it? Can you feel that resistance right now? That resistance is the ego, and noticing it is the beginning of growth. Recognizing your own patterns is crucial. After a disagreement with a partner, you notice yourself rehearsing your correct argument instead of considering how your tone escalated tension. Simply observing this pattern without reacting is the first step towards self-awareness. Let's explore a few steps I've put together that should help guide us toward a more profound awareness. Step 1. Slow the reaction. Before responding, ask, "What am I feeling beneath this?" Usually beneath anger is fear. Beneath criticism is insecurity. Beneath control is anxiety. Step 2. Ask, "What is my role?" Even if it's 10%, own the 10%. Step 3. Sit with shame without collapsing into it. Shame says, "I am bad." Responsibility says, "I made a mistake." Those are not the same. Step 4. Repair when possible. Apologize without justification. "I see how I hurt you and I'm sorry. I'm now working towards improvement." No but, just ownership. This next part will show how to apply this awareness. You yell at a coworker for missing a deadline. Later you take a breath and reflect. "I was stressed and overreacted. I can apologize and clarify my expectations." This is integration in action, awareness without self-condemnation. Reflecting on ourselves and on our own behavior is essential to improving the overall quality of life. The overall outcome of choosing this path leads to uncanny progress in our own personal growth and development. However, there are risks of not reflecting. If we refuse reflection, relationships grow unstable, depression deepens, and isolation increases. We attract the same conflicts repeatedly. We become convinced the world is the problem, and unexamined behavior becomes destiny. Imagine ignoring your own patterns for years. A spouse drifts away. Children mirror your tension silently, and friends stop reaching out. You tell yourself, "It's them, not me." Depression creeps in, layer by layer. And one morning, you wake up to a world that feels colder, not because it changed, but because you have refused to see yourself. This is the cost of avoiding the mirror. Epic Zone implies from his own personal experience that we must first develop the desire to change for ourselves. No one can hand us that readiness. No one can force it into us. The answers we search for are often buried beneath layers of trauma, conditioning, and unexamined pain. Layers that quietly constrict us, shaping our reactions, distorting our perceptions, and slowly suffocating the parts of us that long to grow. When we choose to ignore the self, not out of malice, but out of fear, habit, or familiarity, we don't escape suffering. We return to it. We repeat it. We unknowingly reinforce the very cycles that wound us. And eventually the darkness we avoided demands our attention. The anger, the insecurity, the shame, the unresolved grief. Not as punishment, but as information. What we once rejected as weakness was often the key to understanding ourselves. The very door we refuse to open becomes the threshold we are forced to cross. And in that space, we begin to realize the self was never suffering willingly. It was repeating what it did not yet understand. The freedom of seeing yourself clearly. When you begin seeing your patterns, you feel lighter, not because you are perfect, but because you are aligned. You stop fighting reality. You stop defending illusions. You stop blaming every storm on someone else. And slowly, peace increases. Not because life became easier, but because you became honest. Now, I would like to openly share an experience that has completely rewired my way of thinking, reconstructed my way of being, and transformed my life in ways I could have never expected. For many years, I carried anger inside me that I didn't even know existed. But let me tell you something. It wasn't hard for others to see. I struggled to understand why it was so difficult for me to recognize. I believed I was a good person, an empath, a healer. That was the identity I clung to, and I was wrong. The anger I carried wasn't random. It was formed in childhood. It developed as a survival strategy, protection against being treated like a target, a punching bag, someone easy to overpower. Anger gave me control. Before it, I felt vulnerable. After it, I felt untouchable. What I didn't understand was that the very thing that once protected me had followed me into adulthood and was now shaping my reactions, my relationships, and the outcomes of my life. But I couldn't see it, because to me, it wasn't anger. It was protection. Every time I reacted, I felt justified. I told myself I was standing up for what was right. I told myself I was defending myself and others. It took me over 30 years to realize that what I was defending wasn't truth. It was a wound. I used to say I would never become someone who hurt others. I knew what abuse felt like. I knew the damage it caused. And yet slowly, unconsciously, I became the very thing I swore I would never become. Not because I woke up one day wanting to harm people, but because my perception was distorted for so long that I didn't know the difference between protection and aggression. All I knew was before I had anger, I was mistreated. After anger, no one crossed me, so I trusted it. I didn't realize that the same anger shielding me from pain was also preventing me from seeing the pain I was causing. When the illusion finally broke, it felt like ego dissolution. The identity I built around being the good one collapsed. I didn't fight it. I accepted it. I allowed myself to see everything I had been trying so hard to avoid. That was the real awakening. Not light, not bliss, not superiority, but awareness. I became consciously aware of my emotions, my triggers, and my distortions. The ways I justified harm in the name of protection, and something unexpected happened. I became more understanding and compassionate, not just toward myself, but toward the people I once resented, judged, or even wanted to destroy, because I saw in them what I had finally seen in myself. Unhealed pain disguising itself as strength. I carry shame for what I couldn't see, but I refuse to identify with that shame. Shame can inform growth, but it does not define who I am. I forgive myself, not to escape accountability, but because I understand now that I was operating from an illusion formed long before I had awareness. My way of thinking changed. My reactions changed. My entire way of being immediately began the transformation. And for the first time, I saw the honest truth, not the identity I wanted to believe, but who I actually was. And that truth was the very truth that set me free. So here's a call to action. I invite you to do something radical. After your next emotional reaction, do not analyze them. Analyze yourself. Not with cruelty, with curiosity. Ask yourself, what am I protecting right now? And sit with the answer. Growth is not mystical light. It is uncomfortable truth integrated with compassion. No human being is perfect. Not monks, not prophets, not therapists, not you or I. But awareness is available to anyone willing to look. The question is not who hurt me. The question is, where could I be unconsciously hurting others and myself by refusing to see clearly? The shadow does not disappear when ignored. It integrates when acknowledged, and that integration is where healing begins. If this resonated with you, sit with it, reflect, and if you're ready to build a life of deeper awareness, stay on this path. Because the most powerful transformation is the one that begins when you finally see yourself clearly.